Hello, Garland Nixon here with Mark Sleboda, and there's all kinds of things going on. We got meetings in Saudi Arabia, and we got puppets being thrown under buses. Let's talk. Well, hello, one and all. Garland Nixon here with Mark Sleboda. We got a lot of things going on. Very interesting times we are in. One of the things I want to start off with is this. So lately we've had this back and forth with, of all people, the monkey is now angry at the organ grinder, and Zelensky is now in a war of words with President Trump. Trump is saying you're going to get a peace deal, which seems to me at some point kind of amounts to this. He's saying to the Russians, will you please get this Nazi-infested crap hole off my back so I can do something else? Meanwhile, Zelensky's angry. I don't want to go. The Europeans are literally crying, sucking their thumbs and crying. And I don't know what to make of this craziness. Mark Sleboda, maybe you can make some sense of this, because I sure as hell can't.
Yeah. So I happened to have it on good faith that while J.D. Vance was giving his most recent statements, that Putin and Dmitry Medvedev were watching this together live in the Kremlin, seated in front of the TV. They were sharing a big box of salted butter popcorn and tossing it in their mouths and laughing their asses off as this was going on. I can't confirm that, but I have it on good grounds. Good grounds. Yeah. So there is, I referred to Trump. I have always referred to Trump since his first administration as a chaos bomb. And the chaos bomb is just going off repeatedly in several of the same locations like crazy. And it is going off. I mean, we're not talking like a grenade. We're talking like tactical nuke level. Maybe strategic. I think it's actually strategic level nukes at this point. And it is throwing all, prognostications, all assumptions, all theories, all the time that you've been spending carefully watching the events on the battlefield in Ukraine and calculating out logistics and manpower and artillery shell production and usage rates and everything, and trying to figure out how much longer this could go on, whether the Kiev regime's military forces would crumble or not, how far Russia would go. It's all just toss it all away. just throw it all away, because everything is changing, and everything is changing so fast and so dramatically that it takes a lot. I mean, I form an opinion and an analytical opinion on something like how much longer this conflict will last, and I stand really hard by it, and I will allow myself very gradually to adjust those things as sufficient new information and data points come in. It's just tidal wave. It's just everything is gone, and I am forced to reassess a lot of what I have been thinking about the course of this conflict, how much longer it will last, what the geopolitical situation will look like when it's over, and so forth. And it's one of the things that I did talk about when Trump won the inauguration. I did accurately predict that one of the places the Trump chaos bomb would go off again is the transatlantic relationship, which is a good bet because there were a lot of tensions between the US and Europe during the first administration. And quite obviously, European political leaders were openly cheering for, campaigning for even Biden and then Kamala Harris against Trump. And those fruits are have ripened, and they're come home to harvest. But I myself had no idea how the extent to which this chaos bomb is going off on the transatlantic relationship. Now, one of the things that Keith Kellogg, the who was proclaimed as the Trump envoy, peace envoy to the Ukraine conflict, we now know that he actually has a very specific, narrow focus job. He won't be speaking to Russia at all. His job is actually, and this has been admitted, is to hold the hands of the Kiev regime and Europe throughout this whole process while it's going on, and pacify them or get them in line.
To manage the children's table while the adults eat over here, he's going to manage the kids' table to make sure they don't fight and pull on their toys and cry over rattles and stuff like that.
By the way, it was specifically referred to, right, where Europe and the Kiev regime are in these negotiations, or will be, right, because they really haven't begun yet, but the writing, I think, is on the wall, was specifically referred to as the kids' table by the CEO of the German military industrial complex Rheinmetall. And he was talking specifically about why they are at, or at least one of the major reasons they are at the kids' table, sidelined from this. He says, because their military stocks of Europe are empty. They're empty. And their production has not significantly ramped up after 3 years of this conflict. So hard power equals, position equals power. Hard power equals diplomatic power in a conflict situation like this. And they don't have any hard power. Not certainly not on a par with the big boys in this conversation. So they're suffering for that. The European militaries, whether we're talking the United Kingdom, France, Germany, others, have deteriorated to such a level. If you hear Keir Starmer talking about sending the British military to Russia, pay close attention to what the British press and even British military audits have been saying about the abysmal state of the British military, how they're unable to meet manning levels like catastrophically for an extended period of time now, because no one wants to join. All right. All this money they wasted on these aircraft carriers without having jets to fly off of them, and then stuck decommissioning possibly them, other warships, because they can't man them up, having already sent essentially all of their self-propelled howitzers to Ukraine already, and having none left of their own. They're in a very, very poor state, according to their own assessment. France is in much the same situation, and Germany is, if anything, even worse. And those are supposedly the three big military powers of Western Europe. So,
but I think the Germans can provide schnitzel. I think they've got some extra schnitzel, to help feed the soldiers if they get there and they get hungry.
The schnitzel is really useful.
As the last meal.
Yeah. So anyway, Keith Kellogg, back to Keith Kellogg. He reported, I think it was almost, things are happening so fast. This comment was almost a week ago, I think. And he was asked by a journalist what he thought he said everyone's got to make concessions, and they asked him, well, what concessions does Russia going to make? And one of the things that he brought up, or the thing that he focused on, actually, after hemming and hawing for a few seconds awkwardly on that question, was that the US, the Trump administration, wanted Russia to break up its alliances with China, with North Korea and Iran, right? Strategic partnerships, right? He said alliances, but they're de facto alliances, right? And that was what the Trump administration wanted. So we see where part of their foreign policy thinking is. They want to woo Russia away from China and Iran and North Korea, and essentially maybe even replace Europe, right? Kind of dovetail Europe in behind Russia as the American partner. That seems right now to be the Trump administration's foreign policy vision, such as it is. Okay, so I got news flash for Kellogg and for Trump. That's not going to happen, right? I mean, both Putin and Xi Jinping are well aware that it was the U.S. exploitation of the Sino-Soviet split in the 70s and early 80s that was one of the major reasons why the Cold War ended, right? As it did, with the self-dissolution of the Soviet Union and proclaimed by the West as their victory. That's not going to happen again. They plan long-term. They've got their backs set to each other. They share information and anything. I have no doubt that Putin may play along with Trump. At some point, they'll be doing photo ops and slapping each other on the back, maybe, all kinds of things. And I'm sure Putin will tell Trump whatever he thinks that Trump's ego and narcissism wants to hear, right, about China. But as soon as he's done, he'll be on the phone to Beijing. This is what this Trump said, right? And I approve of that, right? Play Trump as best as you can, right? But keep it all on a level with China. But we can't expect the Russian-Chinese relationship, right? That's fantasy. That's delusion. It's not going to happen. But what could break, right? The one of the geopolitical foundations of the world that we know today and have lived all of our lives in, the transatlantic relationship between the US and Europe, that, on the other hand, is looking like, I mean, we're only 3 weeks into the administration. That could suffer enormous amount of damage, if not actually break, in the next 3 years, right? 4 years.
Did you say the next 3 hours?
Yeah, right. Possibly. I mean, we heard early this week on Monday, right after Trump and Putin met in Saudi Arabia, Macron called an emergency meeting, right? Justice League assemble, right? Or something like this.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? In Europe. And actually, it wasn't all the leaders of Europe. It wasn't all the leaders. It was the leaders that Macron thought that he could rely on for what the real reason for the meeting was. And that was to try to cobble together some European military force to send to Ukraine, right? And part of that was exactly this hard power thing that we were talking about, that the CEO of Rheinmetall, to assemble a military force that theoretically, right, they're talking would be sent into Ukraine as once a ceasefire, which Russia says won't happen, took effect, to then play the role of peacekeepers, quote unquote, right? Which, as the Russian ambassador to the UN pointed out, only the Security Council can approve, at least officially, right? Legally under an international law. Not that the US has ever cared about that. And Russia, of course, has a veto on the Security Council. So he was saying, yeah, that's not going to happen, right? Russia's been pretty clear on that. Whatever hat they're wearing, NATO hat, EU hat, their own national hats, no member, openly uniformed troops of European countries in Ukraine, right? We already know how many mercenaries and unofficials they've had, right? But no military formations, no uniform troops wearing whatever hat or flying whatever flag, or they will be targets, right? Russia will not tolerate that. They went to war to prevent NATO from deploying in Ukraine, right? From absorbing Ukraine. They're not going to let them do it as part of Russia's victory. That's just laughable. I mean, it's what are these people? I don't know what they're doing. Anyway, so Macron thought he was going to assemble some kind of force, and that would remind Trump, hey, we've got something to contribute. We've got a big military. And then, of course, also as a threat to Russia, right? We can send this into Ukraine against you tomorrow, right? That was part of the message, obviously. And they failed. They failed completely to come to any type of agreement. No one is willing. First of all, everyone's military is in a very bad state, and they're living in this fantasy land where, I mean, it's like, I don't actually play these things, but I've seen enough of videos like one of these MMORPGs, right? Where you're bragging about how great your character is, and then you're going into a zone of the world that's for like characters of 100 levels higher than you are, or whatever. That's what this is like. Yeah, they would get massacred in this conflict, right? They would get massacred by the Ukrainians, much less by the Russians.
How would they even get there? You know what I mean? They couldn't even get to the battlefield. If they got to the battlefield, they couldn't resupply themselves, and they wouldn't need resupplies because they'd be slaughtered in artillery. And it's not even in the sphere of rationality.
How would they have that air cover? Right? Of course, they don't actually, if they sent them in, it would be like they wouldn't expect to actually have combat with Russia. They really seriously believe that if they put their troops on the ground on Ukraine, that Russia won't hit them, won't engage them, will just let them be and then settle, right?
Oh my gosh, NATO's here. We better stop. There's 2,500 Brits with a picture of a tank because they've got an IOU. They'll go up to the Russians and surrender. Why? Well, see this right here? We've got a contract for tanks to be built in 3 years. And doggone it, if you don't surrender, in 3 years, those tanks will be here. And then we shall engage you and decisively defeat the Russian army. The first tank brigade will be done, but you got to give us a couple years to get the tanks.
They're in serious denial about realities of the Russian military, of their own militaries, about the state of the battle in Ukraine, about the state geopolitically, politically, where this conflict is, what the Trump administration's policy is. They're so far in this fantasy land because they refuse to admit reality. And JD Vance hit it home again today. Right. And this was a great statement. We've been talking about that on this show, right? And many other shows, and not just us, but many other people in the alt media, right? He said, JD Vance said, the Russians have a huge numerical advantage in manpower and weapons in Ukraine. And this advantage will remain regardless of further Western aid packages. Wow. right?
Because the EU is saying they're going to have another package of $6 billion. Here's the thing about it. Okay, we're going to send you $6 billion to buy weapons. Great. Where can we buy the weapons? We don't really have them yet, and the factories are kind of closed down. And we're going to try to negotiate with the Russians to get enough power to run the factories. That way, we can build the weapons to send them to you to attack the. What the hell? These people, are they hanging out with Zelensky, enjoying some of that, the fruits of the Colombian Andes, shall we say?
If you'll remember, the Czech prime minister tried to come up with a deal to buy artillery shells on the international market, right? This was a little over a year ago, and that completely failed. I mean, he came up spending 10 times what he wanted for a fraction of the artillery shells, and then the ones that they got were exploding in their own guns, right, on the battlefield. Right?
He got them from some guy in Nigeria. There was a guy in Nigeria that had some extra ones. Just to give us the information for your bank account so that we can get the money out, and the shells will be delivered any day now.
And J.D. Vance has admitted the Pentagon's stockpiles are empty, right? It has its minimum of its own requirements, but any excess they had whatsoever, and probably a bit into their own minimum stat armaments, have been sent, and they can't produce fast enough, right? Because they can't ramp up their military industrial complex because of its for-profit basis, right? And it's not geared up for this type of conflict, right? It's not geared up for a artillery heavy, land-centric war of attrition in Eurasia. Meanwhile, the Russians have been preparing for exactly this conflict since the end of World War II, right? Because that was the type of conflict they fought then, and they knew it was going to come again in one form or another. They've been preparing all this time. They never got rid of their surplus military industrial capacity at the end of World War II. Yeah, it wasn't profitable, and it was just sitting there, but it was just sitting there for a time like this. And not only was it just sitting there, they were actually keeping it modernized all this time too, right? What a waste of money that was, huh? But the Western military industrial complex made all of these ridiculous promises like, yeah, we can produce on demand. Okay, right? That might work for, I don't know, IKEA or something, but that doesn't work for artillery shells. Anyway, so the Europeans are living in this fantasy land, and J.D. Vance and others in the Trump administration, Hegseth, are calling them out on it again and again, and they're using this word realism. The real situation. We need to be realistic, right? And again, J.D. Vance made comments. He was saying that this isn't, what they've arrived at with this is not as a result of moralism, right? It's not as a result of sensibilities or anything like that. It's just a realistic situation of reality, dealing with reality, right? That's all it is, right? And if you continue to try to read these, other fantasies, this hopium, the situation that we wish we were into this, you're just going to keep digging yourself in further, and there will be less and less of Ukraine at the end of it for you even to negotiate with as a buffer between Russia and its new most powerful military for land-centric combat in the world that has developed, forged in blood and fire, and well exposed to and well countering Western wonder weapons, right? Over the last 3 years. So seriously, before you really piss off the Russians, such that not only do they not go all the way to Kiev or the Polish border, but yeah, keep poking a stick at them and see if they go further after that. Because what it increasingly looks like to me is Trump is saying, you're on your own, Europe, right? They've made it clear they want to pull US troops out of Europe, right? They want them redirected to the Pacific, right? Which they see China as the real threat. But even with China, I mean, they seem perfectly serious about this. The Trump personally, the White House personally sent the policy to Hegseth, right, the new Secretary of Defense. Prepare for an 8% cut in military spending every year for the next 5 years, or 4, you can dictate, right? That's huge, right? I mean, we all know that if the US cut their spending in half, they would still be far outspending Russia and China, at least in dollar terms. We see how all that spending, what it actually produces for the battlefield that is effective on the battlefield, with the enormous amount of built-in corruption and graft in the exorbitant prices of the U.S. military industrial complex. That's another question. But Trump seems perfectly serious about this. He realizes that this, not just the pursuit of hegemony, but the pursuit of primacy, right? The idea that the US military should be the most powerful military, able to exercise, able to operate and dictate US foreign policy interests anywhere and everywhere in the world, right? Should be more powerful than any other country, even in their own backyard. That's primacy, right? And you can certainly argue that during the 90s, right, and the early 2000s, that the US, if they didn't have primacy, they were well on their way to it, right? But then China and Russia, right, started to grow, right? And India and other countries as well. And that's gone now, right? There's been too much diverted flow as a result of globalization and the whole Bretton Woods process that the US put in place that moved too much money to Asia, right? Where the production was, right? By the US's own economic design, right? Wealth moved to Asia, right? And that has led to the US. It is in an overstretched imperial condition, right? Imperial overstretch. Trump has rightly recognized what has actually been talked about quietly in some military and international relations journals, that the costs that the US was spending on hegemony and primacy were exorbitant, and the rewards, the benefits, were very few. The US has spent too much, and it needs a dose of realism in foreign policy to come back and assess. We need to change our priorities. The pursuit of hegemony and primacy is too expensive. It's not succeeding anyway. We need to retrench. We need to reprioritize, retrench, and cut back, right? Cut the pork, cut the fat where we don't need it. And that requires a new foreign policy position, right? So, to match a reduced military spending and capacity. And Trump seems set on this. This is amazing, right? I mean, what he's put out in 3 weeks, right? Stuff like this has been discussed theoretically for a couple decades now. This is the largest shift in foreign policy between one administration and another in modern history, but perhaps in
Modern,
all of U.S.
I was
history,
going to say, in American
right?
history, definitely. Let me ask you this.
Possibly in all American
let me
history,
throw
right?
something.
Generally, foreign policy changes very little from president to president, right? Even from Obama to Trump, very small. The JCPOA was the biggest thing there. That that was seen as an aberration. That during Trump's first presidency, from Trump to Biden, very little differences.
It
From
gets
Biden
worse.
to
It usually
Trump,
gets worse. It usually
yeah,
gets worse. It usually gets more
worse, right?
intense.
Right, for decades, right? Very little change. It was granted that the U.S. was going to pursue hegemony, pursue primacy, them linked together, expand NATO, all of these things, and that's all changed. It's changed overnight, and it's this in terms of the U.S. foreign policy, in terms of what Ben Rhodes called the blob, right? The U.S. foreign and security policy elite, right? You can call it the deep state if you want. You can call it the permanent bureaucracy, but deviation from that has been verboten. It has been forbidden, right? And during Trump's first administration, when he tried to move even a little bit, it was, oh no, you don't really want to move troops out of Syria and Afghanistan, do you? Because then we might have to revisit our votes, right, for impeachment in the Senate. That sort of thing was going on. Now Trump is in a much more powerful domestic political situation, and he's obviously had 4 years to think, and has actually probably sat down with some of these people, Witkoff and others, right? And he has a foreign policy vision. He has a new grand strategy vision for the United States, which doesn't mean that it's beneficent for the rest of the world, right? It's based on U.S. interests, right? And not all of those. But in the particular of the conflict in Ukraine, it's really looking like he wants to shut this thing down, and he wants it shut down yesterday, right? And Russia is realizing that in negotiations that the U.S. may be willing to give them a lot, maybe willing to give them most of what they want, maybe more than what they want, right? They're going, if you've seen the statements after the meeting of Rubio and Lavrov and others in Saudi Arabia, the Russians have made clear, yeah, Trump and Putin are going to have a meeting, and we know the Americans want to have it yesterday and everything, but we take time. It takes time to build these. Russia's playing this game now, right? They're going to drag this out. They've brought the Trump administration that has bought into this, and they're in no hurry here, right? They're going to put the screws, right? And the Trump administration keeps walking further and further into this, leaving less room politically to maneuver on their side. Trump just called Zelensky a dictator. Now, we've been saying that. We've been saying that the Kiev regime is a dictatorship in one form or another since 2014, right? But the U.S. president said this, right? This all of this, right, including this most recent thing. This means that a team, right? And I don't believe that there's no grand movement behind this foreign policy vision, right? The MAGA movement may get behind it, right? Or at least some of it, right? And some other people like you and me who wouldn't consider ourselves right behind that. But this is a team of radicals on U.S. foreign and security policy, right? They are radicals. They want to radically change U.S. foreign policy for good and bad, right? For Americans, for the rest of the world, right? But they want a radical change, right? They've identified that all of this keep on doing what has been failing is sunk cost fallacy, right? And they are going to risk radical changes, radical transformation of U.S. foreign and military policy, something that I certainly didn't predict, and I don't know anyone out there who was predicting, certainly not the scale of this. And
Although I did, and I put a post up on my YouTube channel from a year ago when everybody is like, no, we're going to fight to the end, and if they're going to go, and I said they will. I said when they get ready to leave, they will exercise, and if anybody can look, the video is up, and it's the post video for my YouTube channel. I said they will exercise the Samsonite option. That when they get ready to go, they will pack their bags and they will walk the hell out of there. Although I had no idea just how accurate it would be, because Mark, to be frank, what I see now is the Russians are like, all right, this is going to be tough. We're ready to go. They're stretching, they're getting their water. All right, we're going to, and the Americans are like, okay, let's look. Oh, is that? That's all you did? Oh, that's all it'll take to get this Nazi-infested crap hole off of our backs. Zelensky's a pain in the neck. We hate this guy worse than you hate. Trump's like looking at Trump's like looking at Tulsi Hegseth, and he's like, this guy's busting my chops here. He's sticking this guy.
What it feels like is that the Trump administration has received the Russian terms, and they're like, that's all? Are you sure you don't want this too? Right? I mean, that's what it feels like.
Look, will you reconsider invading Europe and taking those bastards too? Please. I know you don't want Europe, but please just invade. Could you at least go to Germany and get those snitchel-eating bastards out of here? They're aggravating. I mean, the only person that Trump hates worse than Zelensky, I think, is Keir Starmer, the Starmer, Macron, Schultz group. And Schultz is now stepping up saying, how dare Trump call Zelensky a dictator? You're literally arresting people in your country for insulting someone.
I think the difference there is Trump hates Starmer, whereas Trump just has contempt for Zelensky.
Yeah. Good point.
I mean,
good point. But what's Zelensky?
Completely,
he's like, we will just because you make a deal with the Russians, we will not abide by the deal unless we're involved. And I'm like, aren't you the guy that just said a couple of weeks ago that if the Americans stop giving us money, we're out of this? Specifically, you stole 90% of it anyway. You got no weapons. You didn't get money for weapons. You got money so you could fill your filthy pockets. Take the money, just like the song says, go on, take the money and run, brother.
A little aside, a video popped up on Twitter, and I'm pretty sure it was a real video, an accurate video this week of Keir Starmer thinking he was doing, I guess, some photo op at a boxing gym somewhere in the UK, right? And he had on some gloves and was hitting the punching bag, right? And I'm no boxer and everything, but I know that, right? I mean, you have to watch this video. Keir Starmer, the boxing glove. My wife from Crimea, right? A Crimean communist marketing director, right? Anyway, she kickboxes, right? She boxes several times a week, right? She could kick my butt, right? I know who really wears the pants in this family. Anyway, I'm like, do you want to compare yourself to the British Prime Minister? And she was laughing, just I mean, like she couldn't control herself watching this, right? For those of you who are old enough to remember the Dukakis moment of Dukakis riding around in a tank like a moron, spinning around that Reagan made such great material out. Was it Reagan or George?
Was he the one that was looking the wrong side in the binoculars? Yeah.
It felt like that. If the British press was, even 1 ounce away from the propaganda they would be making hay of pointing out what an ineffectual little, what is the opposite of a Chad? I don't know. The opposite of a Chad is Keir Starmer, right? I mean, and this is the guy who's trying to talk a lot of bunk about sending his military to Ukraine. It's just absurd. It's absurd. Zelensky now understands that U.S. support has completely vanished, which leaves him turning to this effeminate vampires ball in Europe, right? And it's a very sad situation. All right, I gotta say, if the Europeans and the Ukrainians refuse to accept Trump's terms, right, as a result of negotiations with Russia, assuming that they ever come to terms, right, which is still not guaranteed, but increasingly it's looked like that the Americans are very amenable to
the Americans
anyway.
the Americans are basically like, so okay, yeah, Ukraine, whatever. How can we get to this joint ventures and the various financial and economic things and that Ukraine stuff? Where do I sign again? Yeah. Sure, here, get that aside. We got bigger fish to fry. I'm just saying, Americans clearly got bigger fish to fry with the Russians, and they don't care about that crap anymore. Yeah.
One of the things that he's obviously set on is they want Zelensky gone, right? They regime change gone, right? If Zelensky doesn't agree to elections, then they'll figure out another way to get rid of him. I'm pretty sure.
If he don't shut his yap, I think they're going to figure another way to get rid of him. Just saying, if you don't shut his
whatever, unfortunately, whatever kind of quote unquote democratic process is carried out by this Maidan regime, well, in any way, it'll just result in his replacement by Zelensky or again by Poroshenko or someone like that, unless if I don't know, there's some more radical change, because they won't allow, right, any of the parties of East Ukraine to reform and run against them. Right?
They'll have to bring in international observers. You know what I mean? It'll have to be something from outside of the country would have to institute it, because if you let the Banderites
that wouldn't happen unless there's already regime change.
Exactly.
Right? I mean, the Russian tanks would have to, Russian troops would have to officiate the election to prevent another internal Maidan election, right? I mean, it's just it's still not feasible. I still think that it seems likely that perhaps whatever Trump and Putin agree to, assuming they come to an agreement, and let's assume that the Europeans and Zelensky say no, then all the Europeans can provide for the Kiev regime without U.S. support, right? With U.S. support, it's a slow, grinding conflict that could have taken years, right? Russia would still win, right? But it would have been a slow, grinding conflict. They would have called up 18 to 25-year-olds. They would have depopulated Ukraine, right? But they still would have won. It just would have taken a few more years. Now, if it's just the Europeans, that's a speed bump. That's a speed bump on the way to Kiev and the Polish border. That's all it is. Right?
Go ahead. I was going to say
maybe
this.
Trump will just walk. Maybe Trump really will just walk away. I've been saying it for months now. Trump can't just walk away. He's the U.S. president. Well, I don't know. It looks like Trump may just walk away.
I got another angle. And it's based on a breadcrumb. Marco Rubio recently said. He said, yes, when we get a deal. He didn't say if. He said, I'm paraphrasing, but he said, when we get a deal, because they're just ready to sign something. They don't give a crap. So they'll sign a blank piece of paper if the Russians hang them. Fill it in later, right? If it's anything to do with Ukraine, it's done. Okay. He said, the West will have to drop sanctions. He didn't say the U.S. is going to drop its sanctions. So here's the bottom line, too. Let's not forget this. One of the things that happened as a result of this conflict was when the Europeans cut themselves off from the Russians for a lot of stuff, now they got to get it from the U.S. So now they're in a position where they're far more inured to the U.S., to the economy, LNG, oil, all kinds of things that they used to get from the Russians. Trump can be a bully. He ain't going to walk away. He's going to say, we got a deal. And Europe, you're going to go by the deal. And if Europe says no, he's going to say, I'll crush you like a flea. The LNG ships will turn around. This will turn around. There will be no German cars, no British cars, no Land Rover, no nothing. I will, and the U.S. does have the ability to obliterate, Trump's famous words, obliterate the European economy. And Trump will do it. My prediction, I understand, it's a now this one's just as scenario is just as likely as another. One scenario is that Trump says it's yours, Europe, I'm walking away. I believe the ceremony, the more likely scenario is that Trump don't say, no, you're walking away. Number one, he wants to get rid of 20%. He says, look, all the ones along the Russian border there, Russia, I can't make Europe get rid of theirs. All of our troops along your border. That's the 20% that's coming home back to 97. Number one. Number two, Europe, you're going to sign this deal. And if you don't, well, I'm just saying the pain will increase. My belief is he will bully the hell out of them and he'll force them to do it.
You know, it doesn't even have to force them that much. Let's say that the U.S. under Trump, right, they reached the deal and Trump lifts a lot of U.S. sanctions. Some of it he has to get through Congress, but he's already demonstrated he has pretty firm control of the Republican Party, even on a confirmation of Tulsi Gabbard. So, I mean, he can
get a ham sandwich through Congress at this point.
Height of his power, it's possible, right? So let's say that he removes, most U.S. sanctions against Russia. That leaves the Europeans, right? And they say, von der Leyen and Keir Starmer and the leader of Germany, who will probably be Merz at that time, right? They say no. Here's the thing. The way European sanctions against Russia are structured, they come up for a renewal vote every 6 months automatically, right? All it takes is Viktor Orban and Robert Fico to say, look, the Americans just canceled their sanctions. We're not going to suffer this anymore. No. And that's it. They're gone, right? That's all it takes, right? And there will be more defections from that if the U.S. does it by then, more than just Orban and Fico. It won't be them going out on a limb on this, right? It will be others, maybe even Gorgescu in Romania, right? As well.
Slovakia,
right?
Austria.
Yeah. Watch Maloney in Italy suddenly change
Greece. What about all those companies? If you got a company and you see that like everybody else is doing business and we've got Siemens and the Russians are saying, yeah, we got a few things that we need from you. You can come in and do it. I'll tell you this, though. A lot of things that the Russians have replaced with Russian stuff, I will guarantee you some of them people are going to be mad because they're going to say, hey, we're bringing McDonald's back. And the Russians going to be, well, interesting about that. No, the hell you ain't. We replaced it with the McDonald's. The things that Russia has replaced with, that has the money staying in Russia, that is employing Russians. Why should they allow these people who stabbed them in the back the last time? They have to screw them.
Visa, MasterCard, and Coke have all begun discussions about re-entering. They're not going to do it tomorrow, but they're already talking publicly, right, about going back into Russia. And the response from the Russian government and the Russian business community is like, I mean, they can, but they're going to find that it's a completely different market situation than when they left, right? They don't rule the roost anymore, right? And
cars.
There's so many.
There's Russian cars have come back. Yeah. Chinese cars are all over the place.
Yep.
Why the hell are you going to buy a Citroen or whatever the hell those things don't run anyway? Peugeots, they don't run. Why are you going to buy that when you can get Russian and Chinese cars now? Even Iranian cars, I understand, are for sale in.
Yes.
In
yeah. They opened a factory in St. Petersburg. Yeah.
Why not do business with your friends?
Hmm?
I said, why not do business with your friends? These people hate your guts. They don't even like Russian cats, for God's sake. They don't want to read Dostoevsky or watch.
If you remove restrictions, then it becomes a market, right? And there's certain people who will always, I don't know, my parents, Americans, we will always buy German cars.
Right. Yeah.
Right. You will have that to a certain degree, but to a large extent, it's a very different market situation, and the Americans and the Europeans coming back into Russia will have to fight for every inch of market share they hope to gain. They will never gain back what they lost, but to gain back even a portion of it, they will really have to fight. And a lot of Russians, I mean, I'm of the opinion, right, that I don't want to buy anything from the West.
I don't blame you.
Yeah.
I don't blame you.
I'm not saying that I can buy nothing, but I minimize, right? If I have any other opportunity to buy anything, I will buy from any other country, from Russia, from China, from anywhere else, rather than buy something from the West. And I know that I'm not the only person in Russia that feels that way, right? So it becomes not just it's the best market choice, but it becomes political and moral too.
Yeah.
So
and you're going to have
there are a lot of Russian businesses that will fight against agreements that have sanctions lifted in Russia. Why? Because they're making a lot of money, right? They will want this dragged out, for a long period, if not forever. They will not, they'll be back in competition, right? And they would rather not, right? They've got a largely captive market now. They're making lots of money, right? They will be. There are lots of Russian businessmen, right, and politicians, right, everything, who will be against the West lifting sanctions on Russia, because now their vested interest is in those sanctions remaining.
Well,
Russia's not in a big hurry to have, it's not on their priority list of this is what we want in negotiations. Sanctions lifted is near the bottom of that list.
Yes.
Right? It's actually the Trump administration that, from my understanding, is pushing this, right? One of the reasons why is they want Russian energy. They want Russian oil and gas back on the market, because that will lower the price of oil and gas globally, which will reduce inflation for American taxpayers in the United States, who don't realize that they were getting an extra we're fighting Russia tax from Joe Biden for the last few years on essentially everything, right? Trump would like to lower inflation in the United States. And that's one of the easiest, if he can't get Saudi Arabia to go all out pumping, which they just said no to, then the next best thing they can do is bring, remove, the Chinese and the Indians and that everyone's been buying up Russian. But if the West is buying Russian energy too, right, then that removes all of these disruptions in the global distribution system for energy that the West had introduced, right? And that will suddenly lower prices for everyone everywhere.
And I bet you this, Russia makes a lot of stuff. There will be, like here in the United States, a huge market for Russian things that we couldn't buy before. As Russia industries increases, Russia's export market is going to probably go through the roof also. I want to say this, one other thing. Here's something. And as I said, these things to me are things that say that, like Tulsi Gabbard and people of reason are around. The U.S. is objecting to the term Russian aggression in an upcoming G7 statement, marking the third anniversary. Okay. While those things may seem like a lot of people but they are kind of really in a big deal.
They're deal. It's
particularly just, with the Europeans. They're probably now their heads are exploding.
It's inverting the whole narrative that Americans have been subjected to for the last 3 years about this conflict, right? And they're openly saying these are Russian talking points. And Trump came out. This is not what Russia's saying. This is what I'm saying, right? Right. This is reality. And it's threatening this delusional little world that they live in. Michael McFaul, if you'll remember this Obama administration ambassador to Russia, Mr. Regime Change, right? Who personally banned me from the U.S. Embassy in Moscow, by the way, after I asked him some uncomfortable questions in a town hall format. Anyway, so Michael McFaul, is back on Twitter, and he's saying that Trump is getting all of all of this disinformation is because Trump is watching RT. And Zelensky said that Trump is drowning in disinformation, right? No, they've just escaped your disinformation. That's what it is. That's the situation. And Michael McFaul said, he's buying into the Russian narrative. No, he's rejecting your narrative.
The game is over. What do you think about the vote? Any surprises you suspect coming up with the vote on the 23rd in Germany before we go?
All we have to go by is polls, right? I don't live in Germany. I don't have a sense on the ground. So the polls say that the AfD will do better, but they'll be locked out again, right? No matter what they do, because the other parties will refuse to coalition with them, and it will be stuck again, most likely, with a coalition of the Christian Democratic Union on top, plus the SPD, probably minus Olaf Scholz. He'll be cast to the side, and the Greens will probably have to be dragged into it again, because even two parties probably won't cross the 50% threshold. They'll probably just make it with the Greens, maybe. It will be another awful grand coalition mess. I know Merz wants to escalate. He wanted to send Taurus cruise missiles and the like, but he'll be doing it on his own. I don't see that. I mean, they'll have to reassess everything. And even, the results of the German election, we're seeing dramatic changes happen day by day with each new announcement from the Trump administration in the United States. Who knows what it's going to be on the other side of the German election. So now, some people have predicted that the AfD will do much better than expected. Certainly Elon Musk has been loudly pushing for them, which I don't believe any oligarch, right, has a right to interfere in politics like that, right? He should just shut up, right? He has nothing to do with German politics. Even if I myself would like to see the AfD or even, even better, if Sarah Wagenknecht's party, they appear to be collapsing, largely because she backed down, I think, on the, Ukraine skeptic position she had. But so, some people were predicting the AfD will just come out of nowhere, dark horse, and win. I'd love to see it. I'd love to see everything inverted, right? But all I have to go by is polls, and the polls don't say that. So the polls could be completely wrong, like they have been in the United States. But until then, that's what I have to go by, because I don't live in Germany, and I don't have an ear to the ground there. All I can go is by the polls. So that's the most likely outcome. What it will lead to is really just more of the same paralyzed, ineffective Germany that we've seen for the last few years under Olaf Scholz. It won't be much different under a coalition government with Merz.
They'll be crying. We already know how the Germans do it. They'll be crying.
Did you see the CEO/chairman of the Munich conference?
Oh my God.
Did you see him cry over the travesty? After Hegseth spoke, and after J.D. Vance read the Riot Act to the Europeans, and the transatlantic relationship is collapsing right during that Munich conference. And the chairman of the Munich conference, on his exiting statements, he started to cry. And they were applauding him, and they were all so sympathetic with him. And I'm like, I'm drinking your tears, buddy. You hegemonic tool. You pathetic, wallowing little crying. Oh, it was beautiful. It was beautiful. All I could think back is, how this all kind of started. It's gone a full circle with Putin's statement at Munich in 2007, challenging all of this back then and warning the West, don't go down this path the way you're going. All right. And then fast forward to 2025, and Munich just blew up in their faces, largely as a result of the realities of Russia beating NATO on the battlefield in Ukraine.
Yeah. Putin basically said to the Germans,
yeah,
we don't want to do it. Don't make me have to kick your ass again. We'll do it if we have to. But please, you don't want it. I don't want it. Don't make me have to. Every 100 years or so, you stupid bastards have to come to our border. We got to kick your ass and we got to send you back. Schnitzel eating bastards, get out of here. No, they couldn't listen. They couldn't listen. So, sometimes some people only learn through pain.
A long history of Western invaders of Russia, right? Of Charles of Sweden, right? Of Napoleon, of Hitler, right? Now Joe Biden is going to join that list of Western leaders who thought they could come into Russia and
through Ukraine. Don't they could come through Ukraine? They always think they can come through Ukraine, don't they? Some people. Well, thanks a lot, Mark. Where can people find you online?
You can find me at Elon Musk's Twitter X at Mark Sleboda1, and on Telegram and Substack at The Real Politique with Mark Sleboda.
All right. Wonderful. Thank you very much. All right. Also, everybody, don't forget, Mark's got to run. You all don't forget to make sure you hit the like button and subscribe button, and you can join. There's hopefully, let me make sure, there should be a join button there that will allow you to become members of the channel. So make sure if you can, of course, only like $2 or $3 or something to join. So if you can possibly join, do that. Make sure you follow Mark online, and Mark comes on every week or so. He's very gracious. Follow me also on Rumble. Follow me also on YouTube. You see everything going across the bottom. That's where you follow me. That's how you donate, all of that stuff.
Everybody, Garland and I have been talking several times a week for years now, right? On Sputnik before, right? Biden shut us down right there. But if you want to continue to hear me and other people, talking with Garland like this, toss him your coffee money, please.
Also, who knows, Mark? The way things are going, we might be back talking.
We might be back. I was just saying that this week. Right, another 6 months. The old Sputnik crew may be back. I don't want to, knock on wood, but
we might get the band together. I'm betting more likely than not. How about you? That's every now and then I ride by and look. That studio's still sitting there, owned by the same people. The desk is still there. Nothing really changed in the studio. Almost as though some people thought maybe one of these days it'll open back up, huh?
Yeah, just last week I was doing an interview with Ted and Manila on their show TMI, and Ted started introducing the show, and he just introduced it as if it was still the show on Sputnik, right? Oh, wait a minute, we're not on that show anymore. Same old band is back.
Well, I'm going to get going and get myself together, because I'm going to the Russian embassy today for a reception for Defender of the Fatherland Day. How about that? All right. We're all out. Thanks a lot, everybody. Mark and I are out.